Hello survivors, this is First Aid Spray's Resident Evil 4 Remake feature-length podcast, double feature in fact. This is part 2. If you've not listened to the first part of this episode yet, highly recommend that, where we go deep in on the gameplay of Resident Evil 4 Remake and then come back. It's available right now wherever you're listening to this podcast, immediately below or next to this episode in fact. But otherwise, please enjoy the concluding chapter of our Resident Evil 4 Remake extreme discussion. Let's talk about the story of the game, not characters or character arcs, we'll handle that afterwards, but just talking about the plot and how it's been put on display throughout Resident Evil 4 Remake, how it might differ, so on and so forth. I guess I'm just going to quite simply put it out there that, and I've said this on lead up, so it really did pan out well for me, that I love the tone of this game a lot more this time around. That's not a secret that I wasn't overly fond of RE4's. I appreciated its cheesy action hero stuff, but it's not the Resident Evil for me. Whereas this, bit more serious, definitely appeals to me more. And it's not without its humour, certainly, and it's not even without its own ridiculousness. But in terms of the story, I don't have a huge amount to say because it is mostly the same, be that for positive or negative reasons, and I'll get into that as we go on. Steve, how did you feel about story?
Obviously, it's more serious in tone this time around, as you've said. I feel like certain character motivations have changed, and not necessarily for the better. We'll talk about that more on characters, but, you know, it harms it a bit for me. I like the fact that there is now more of a tonally consistent through line for Leon, in the way that he behaves and the way this adventure goes. It generally feels a lot more grimy and stressful, as opposed to slightly lighthearted and fun. I mean, the general thrust of it is still the same. You know, Leon goes in, saves Ashley, smashes a cult to bits, Ada gets a MacGuffin and buggers off.
Yeah.
But, I think the main thrust of it for Leon in particular is obviously his new interactions with Luis and the revised stuff with the villains. Really, the thrust of the story is largely the same. I actually don't appreciate that they don't hack his comms. This is, again, something that's going to be talked about later. But, what we do get with Hunnigan, though, is great. I like the fact that she's more of a voice in his head you can converse with. Yeah. And even if it's just basically like goes, I should probably go check that thing out. I'm like, yeah, Leon, you probably should go check that thing out. Good job. You know, it's nice that there's more of a through line there. Even though I kind of still wish there was more banter between the villains and him.
I've got definitely thoughts on that point. And on top of Hunnigan as well, like Luis is my number one sort of favourite change of this game. And we'll get into that a bit more in characters. But him having greater impact on the story, greater display of that impact by having his own little cutscene with Ada and stuff. And this is where we start really ripping into spoiler territory, finding out in the narrative, like he's tied closer to the narrative by being a former Umbrella man. I'm like, do you know what? That really works. Like, instead of just being a scientist who sort of works for whatever, I'm kind of okay with that. That totally works for me.
I mean, is it the Umbrella 6th Laboratory deep cut?
That is the next thing, isn't it? That's like the HCF moment in RE7 where you go, wow, that's deep cut is definitely the phrase. Like, to see that he was part of Umbrella 6th, which is, we've all been kind of leading here, really, because Remake 3 certainly implied that Nemesis and Las Plagas were somehow related, and now we're told that Luis worked on the Nemesis, so he must have used his Plagas knowledge. For me, there's an issue with the timeline here. Like, I don't necessarily understand how he gave the Plagas to Umbrella and then he went back to Salazar. Like, I don't get that, but
I mean, if you look at the credits, his name is now Luis Ciro Navarro.
Yes.
And Navarro is a family in the village. So from my perspective, at least as far as I can understand it, Luis now discovers the Plaga, takes it to Umbrella, they use it for Nemesis, and then he comes back to it after.
Comes home.
Yeah.
I guess so, because I guess he's grown up in an area where it's, you know, either widely known about, even if it's just in like a sort of local myth fashion, but he happens to get a piece of this amber or whatever. And now we know
he's Leather Daddy's daddy.
He's Leather Daddy's daddy. Yes. Yeah, I thought, I'm super okay with that. I wondered if Navarro was like a cover name, but if there's evidence that it's a a family name, then that's cool. I'm okay with those inclusions, certainly. Other than that, though, as you say, for me, the rest of the story pretty straightforward. Jordan, how do you feel about the story in RE4R?
It's a tough one because I think that overall it is sort of stronger in its sort of like presentation and its cohesion to the rest of the sort of series. Kind of feels like something that is in service to the broader lore, and obviously there'll be a debate about exactly what the lore is after this game, like there has been for the last few remakes. But it obviously does make an effort to sort of expand upon in a fashion that I think is a little bit more sort of accessible to players. Exactly sort of what is the backstory, not only to Las Plagas, but also, you know, further ties into Umbrella, and for the characters themselves. I think that works all really well. But as far as sort of like the main story is concerned, you're starting to see that sort of tonal shift that happened starting with the original sort of Remake 2.
Yeah.
In that you're trying to kind of like, I don't know, it's almost like trying to balance them out. Kind of make them semi sort of grounded compared to all of the original Resident Evil games. The thing is, Resident Evil obviously comes from a slightly sort of hokey, cheesy, you know, B-movie sort of style of storytelling and a degree of, or lack of, seriousness. And this game, like the other two remakes of recent, is obviously trying to find something that's more of a sort of a middle ground. And I don't necessarily have that much against it, because I knew that it couldn't necessarily be the sort of scenery, sort of chewing, Metal Gear Solid style kind of story presentation that the original had. It would just stick out like a sore thumb next to the other two remakes of recent. But I do think something's a little bit lost, because I don't think the game necessarily, or the story necessarily, knows what tone it should go for in the absence of that. It's not necessarily playing up more of the horror. It's not necessarily playing up more of the peril. As much it feels like it's traded something off, but not necessarily replaced it with something substantial enough for me. And it does impact the characters a little bit as well. And so, I mean, I certainly still take the original story over this new one, even though I think that the new one is more beneficial to the series as a whole.
Yeah.
It's just the original story. It's weird because this one I can come away knowing so much more about the characters, their backstories, how they're connected, and I'm intrigued by how it sort of reaches back into the past and what it leads to in the future. I love that things like Operation Javier are getting sort of more of a sort of a focus. It actually sort of like lending it some real sort of like credence and importance in that. You didn't really have that in the original.
No.
Like there were a couple of throwaway lines, but everything was more or less just a sort of a straightforward action flick. You didn't have those sort of moments where, you know, characters actually sort of maybe slow down and talk about what on earth is going on in the wider sort of scale of this. And so I appreciate that for, you know, what the new one brings. It's just it's hard to top how ridiculous the original story was. I'm glad it almost doesn't try to sort of match it. I just wish it maybe it leaned into something else more rather than just sort of it's just a bit generalized, I suppose.
I absolutely see where you're coming from, even though we are our personal history with RE4 and obviously our feelings on this are definitely different. I can absolutely see everyone's opinion about that and understand where that comes from. And for what it's worth, even though we do come at it from different points of view, I do have on my notes here that it really could have done so much more, either to serve itself, or there are some things about it connecting to other games that I don't necessarily like. That's a moment for when we get into characters, certainly. Kelsey, how do you feel about the story of RE4 Remake?
I'll zip through because I know James is keen to do his story stuff.
Yeah, that's why I'll let James go last and let him struggle.
I don't have much to say, but yeah, I think I've said before that Resident Evil 4 feels like one of those weird spin-off comic books that DC and Marvel do, where you have like Batman in Victorian times or Green Lantern fighting xenomorphs. That's for you, James. And John Cena teaming up with Scooby-Doo is another one. It's just, you know, it's very similar to the original. The story, again, is sort of kind of in a vacuum. But this one made changes and made a better attempt at making it feel connected to the wider franchise, which you've all kind of touched on. And that I really, really do appreciate. And it's the character stuff that I'm going to focus on in a bit. But, here it's a big, silly action movie with horror injected into it. And the lore additions are nice. To me, the story doesn't have the same emotional impact as some of the other games, but they definitely stepped it up here to make it more atmospheric. And you mentioned tone, Sai, you're completely right there. And those lore additions I thought were really good. It's not kind of shoved in your face. It's all a lot of it's in the files and kind of sub story. But that main story, no magic crystals, thank and although like the story is kind of like bombastic and it doesn't have that convoluted nature of RE6, so there's crazy stuff going on, but it felt more tangible to which is a weird thing to say considering everything that happens in this game. But yeah, I'm a fan. It's pretty easy to get, and then there's little bits in there which made it more connected, and that I think was a big thing that all of us wanted, and I think we got it largely, so it's hard to complain really. But I appreciate Jordan's points as well. So it's still the spin-off crossover weird comic book thing to me, but it's good fun.
You're so right about the files as well. Just to say, stuff about like the Salazar family history is really cool, and I really appreciate. And this is an often thrown issue with RE4 is that it doesn't really. This is the point in the series where we just stopped explaining monsters so much, and they at least tried a little bit with the BOWs, telling you who they were beforehand, and they kind of touch on. And I don't know if this is something that James is going to get into, but they definitely touch on. In the case of Verdugo, I'm going to inject myself with black liquid. We don't get an explanation of what that is. There's like we're going to go off on a massive side tangent if we try and speculate about it as a group too much. But obviously there's some implications there in terms of recent Resident Evil games. So that's very interesting all the same. But James, I know you're ready to go. Let us know what your thoughts on the story are.
Yeah, don't worry, Sai. I will go into
Let's
those
do
implications. All right, class. Everyone sit down. I know you're already sitting down, but listen to Professor James spout some nonsense, okay? Right. There will not be a test, okay? Just, right. So I'm going to retread stuff from the OG and this game because I want everything to be cohesive. And I'm only going to be focusing really on the ancient history leading up to 100 years ago and some of present day. Okay, so the story of the original game was really empty. It was crap. Okay, and one of the things that I was most excited to see from this team was them working on this story for this new game. The only evidence we got of a deeper lore connection was a fossil found in the mines that mentioned the plague. I mention this all the time, but it's because it infuriates me so much that nobody has spoken about it in any of the RE games. Fossils means that this means millions of years old, right? From what we understand, which meant that the Resident Evil franchise, maybe not at that point, it was just guff. But right now, in my opinion, this means that they're not just going into bioterrorism, but they're also stretching into ancient history. And that stuff really excites me. I love ancient civilization and what it could mean. And I went into my whole aliens rant last podcast about it. Right. But in this newest edition, we have some changes to that, but not for the worse. The Plaga was found in huge forms of amber, which as a material is far easier to extract from than a rock if you believe Jurassic Park. Like the original puts forward. Amber though is still incredibly old. Like in our world, the oldest amber that we've ever found is 320 million years old. 320 million years old. Words are hard. This is the start of the RE4 timeline. Possibly hundreds of millions of years old.
Yeah.
Like way back, right? To my knowledge, and I'm sure people will correct me if I'm wrong, the next jump we get is potentially the 15th to the 18th century. This is within the timeline of the game. Though the thing that you mentioned just now, Sai, the Salazar chronology note, it doesn't have dates. But due to other notes and like kind of what coincides with the writings and the records, that time frame makes sense. We can only presume that these demons were the Plaga infected when they dug too deep, as dwarves do. We know this region has isolated itself from the rest of the world too. Its technology and worldview is still stuck potentially hundreds of years before, with like present day 2004, with machinery being brought in as helpful aid for the miners. But their culture and ethics are still frozen in time. Then, 100 years, give or take, before 2004, Ramon Salazar got sick. Now, this is something I didn't put down in my notes, right? But this is going to sound really wild, but are the world wars in the Resident Evil universe?
Yes, as in World War One, World War Two.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I want you to take special note of that, like when this happened 100 years or so ago from 2004, because give or take, this is around, like, to give or take a couple of decades, this is around when Miranda also promised a gift to the village in Romania, which happened in 1919.
Right.
Like, do I think these two and the reason why I say that, by the way, is because Spanish influenza, right, happened around that time too.
Yeah.
Right. So somebody got sick, right, and then they were promised things by Sadler, and then it got bad. You know, do I think these two things are related? Yes. Do I think the Megamycete and the Plaga are the same? No. But I do think the Plaga is an ancient organism, whereas the Megamycete is maybe its child.
Interesting.
More on that later. So, this is not a coincidence. The sign of worship for Miranda is 4 points around a circle made of feathers which splay out like fingers. In the center is the Kadu. Whereas the sign of worship for the Church of the Iluminados is 4 hands placed in a similar way with a blue gem at its center. The Sadler family is old, and that island is where they looked over the Valdebolos region where the castle and the village is set. We have 2 dates for the Sadler family. There could be another one, but I couldn't get that in the ritual room. I couldn't get to it in time last night. I just got very tired. So the earliest one we know is 1741, so that's the 18th century, but they could go back further than that, judging by the ancient ruins on the island and hints at ancient civilization being there in further notes. And we see it. Like, there's stuff there that looks very degraded, potentially thousands of years old. Right, but that's theory. The demons are the Sadler family. I think that's pretty obvious. And the Salazars had been fighting them back for centuries or even longer. Okay, so now back to the connection between Miranda and the Sadlers. In several notes in RE4R, we're hinted at a black goo-like substance, which you just brought up, Si. I honestly don't know what
the pathogen. I'm sorry.
Exactly. I was going to say, like, I don't know what the fascination is with media right now, and black goo is, but it's pretty hot, apparently. I think Miranda may be a Sadler or has relations with them in some way. But she went excuse my pun, separate ways to look for methods to bring back a child because the Plaga killed kids who were infected with it. That's also in a note. The black goo may be a reference to a Megamycete being in this area or giving Miranda a lead to search for one in the first place. Or she may have just made it. I think she made it, to be honest. The way that the Megamycete and the Plaga work is being a part of a network. The Megamycete works through the mycelium or mold, and the Plaga works like a hive of insects do due to pheromones or dancing. No, really, look it up. Bees dance. They do a whole dance thing. And the similarities don't stop there. The way the Kadu was created used nematodes, which are worm-like parasitic creatures. And what do we see when we blow a Ganado in half? Worm-like creatures reaching out to claim life. Also, it's what we kind of denote with Nemesis as well.
Right, tentacles.
So these all have a connection. And that's just ancient history. The story of present day is us, as usual, getting there after everything has gone to pot. Osmond Sadler has ideas of expanding his Plaga empire to one of the biggest empires on the planet, the US. So he offers Krauser power. And Krauser was like, oh yeah, brother, and stole the president's daughter because the US doesn't know how to treat its veterans.
Sorry. Hulk Hogan. Yeah, okay.
Ashley was to be infected, then sent back, and Sadler would have control over the entire nation. But our floppy head hotness turned up and ruined his plan. This is like, that's like the overarching main story, right? That's like what we recognize. But there's all this stuff I'm so interested in that happened. Like the initial story of RE4R is like an iceberg. Like the main plot is just the tip of it, but Like, there's so much more to it now, and it's one of its strongest points for this game, whereas it was its weakest point for me beforehand. Thank you for coming to class. We may carry on.
Well done. Yeah, I really, it's a thing that actually is worth saying. I really appreciate that they did that, because I don't really remember what the files in RE4 are like, but I'm pretty sure they're mostly just there to prompt you gameplay wise. A lot of the sort of Sadler and Salazar history that you've mentioned, we get via like guidebooks and stuff. It's not in RE4, so it's good to have that in RE4R. Switched up a little bit, more information here and there, certainly. But in terms of the Village and 7 connections, yeah, they are interesting indeed. Okay, let's jump into characters. There's a lot to get through. RE4 has quite an expansive cast in its own sort of way. Lots of iconic characters. I'm actually going to be selfish here and start us off. And it references back to what some of you were saying about Leon in Resident Evil 4 now feeling like a part of Leon's actual history instead of this weird standout dude with a bunch of one-liners who laughs about everything. He does really feel like a step between 2 and 6 now, which just feels very deliberate. I really love Leon in this. He's still got some sass and one-liners. The best one-liner in the series now belongs to Leon at the end of this game. I'll give you a holy body. I think people might sleep on his arc here. That's been brand newly added to the game. Krauser says, "You haven't changed, rookie." Luis asks, "Can people change before he dies?" Ada says, "You just think you've changed." And Leon says, "This time it has to be different." This is the step between naive cop Leon, who sees everything that he does that just mentally ruins him, and then by RE6, where he's just much more stoic, and like Vendetta even, where he's like drinking himself to death on his vacation. It feels so much more a natural fit into Leon now, and I really, really, really appreciate all that stuff. Yeah, it's so simple, but so effective. Yeah, bravo, basically, I guess. Kelsey, let's go. How do you feel about characters? Let's get the rundown.
Yeah, I won't go through them all because there's loads, so I'm just going to focus on my key good and bad. You've hit the nail on the head with Leon. Not going to repeat it. Spot on with that. I'm going to get my biggest criticism about this game out of the way first, and that's Sadler. Now, the Sadler lore that James has touched on is awesome, but I think Sadler in this game is completely... this game came dangerously close to ruining him completely. I don't know what happened here, but I think my biggest issue, and I don't really have issues with cuts and stuff, but they cut out like the early meeting with Sadler in the church in this game, and I think it has a huge knock-on effect where this game is desperately in need of another scene or two of him interacting with the heroes, because they hold back for so long on like the Sadler reveal. Yeah. And he's just like, flashing in the mines as a voice and stuff, and as a shadowy sort of cutaway, which completely disrupts like the balance of power. And so I almost not sure I ever felt Leon was fully in trouble, because there wasn't like that key bad guy presence. It just wasn't strong enough for me. And I think if you had met him early and that connection with him as a villain was made, it would have been a lot stronger. Whereas here, it's just, far less impactful. And I kind of struggled. You might even forget about Sadler until the moment he kind of takes his hood off. And I'm just a bit confused as to what happened here. And I think there's been a lot of focus on certain things in the development of this game. And I do think this is a big oversight, because I think that meeting in the church has really messed up the sort of, as I say, power dynamic. And it was a big thing for me that I felt the whole way through. And we all have different experiences playing the game, but for someone who I think is such a key character, and I've made fun of him in the past for being like Jafar from Disney, but he wasn't like that here. And I actually quite liked the new voice. I thought it was kind of quirky and unusual, but there just wasn't enough of him. And I think this game is missing its big bad because of it. It feels like the game potentially is, given the way it unfolds at the very, very end, it's potentially missing, a few extra scenes. But so it really, really frustrated me how Sadler was handled. But on the flip side of that, Lewis is the absolute MVP for me. I think we've sort of touched on it already. The working for Umbrella is so important in making this feel like Resident Evil, and his character, I think, is, along with Leon, like one of the best written throughout the game. Like, he kept me guessing, is he the good guy, is he the bad guy? He has, I think, you said Leon has the best one-liner. I think Lewis has some of the best dialogue in the game. Hey, that was my lance, absolutely floored me. Like, he is so lovable in so many different ways. The lab photo, I mean, this just felt like a gift for RE fans. Like, this just added so much depth to his character, and seeing him in the lab with his lab coat on, this was like a wink to the fans. And it was kind of, it may have been a bit, you could have put Wesker in the photo and it would have been too much. But yeah, this is a staple I feel like should just be in every Resident Evil game. Someone pictured in an Umbrella lab. I absolutely love that. And yeah, his questions about redemption towards his death, just superb stuff. Lovely bit of soul and emotion, something I think we can all relate to. Atoning for bad things. Can we be redeemed? I've never worked on bioweapons, but humans are complex and they get caught up in weird things. And I think Leon's arc is great. I think Lewis's might be the best. Leon's arc, we've got it with the context of RE2 and potential future as well. Lewis basically just exists in this game. And I think in the experience of this game, his arc is the best for me. So yeah, blown away by him. I think they've turned a character that was a bit of I don't want to say he was a bit of a meme, but maybe he was in the past, to being, absolutely fantastic. And not much else to say. I'll let other people take it away. I think the Leon and Ashley relationship was just infinitely better. Ashley comes off less like a 12-year-old and more like someone her own age. And Leon is likable. And that's my two big points. Just not happy with Sadler and so absolutely in love with Lewis. Just knocked it out of the park.
I think, we're going to absolutely have to get into the Luis thing because he's so good. Like, capital letters, like as if it's like a title. He's been given the Carlos treatment, and we all hoped that for him, and he's absolutely gotten it. I think in the original game, he's perfectly fine. Underbaked, certainly. Yeah. He's not a bad character, but this time around, he is the standout character of the game for me. As you said, his arc is great. We get more backstory, not just Umbrella, but we get files written by like his grandfather that looked after him and stuff like that. And we get to know more about him and his love for this Don Quixote book, and tying back into Leon as well. And that both their arcs kind of connect. When Luis says to Leon, "I hope you like thrill rides," and at the end of the game, when they get on the stupid boat thing to get out, Leon says to Ashley, "You like thrill rides?" Yeah. I'm like, showing the effect that Luis has had on Leon. Amazing. Chef's kiss. Yep. Just, brilliant. I did a list for work, which was changes we loved about this game. And I thought, is putting Luis at number one just a bit insular? And I was like, no, because he's brilliant. Yeah, he's so good. I love him. Steve, characters, good, bad. How do you feel?
Okay, so we've already touched on, I think, Leon. As much as I love the original version of Leon in original RE4, kind of an outlier, kind of ridiculous for the sake of ridiculousness in its own game. More Dante than Leon, certainly. Current Nick Apostolidis take on RE4 Leon is fantastic. Kind of hope they give him his own original adventure soon.
It'd be awesome.
As opposed to RE2 and now RE4. Let him have his own. Ashley, great. Luis, you've already said pretty much everything I wanted to say. Kind of, I feel a little bit to the detriment of the fact that Ada has been I feel a bit mishandled. If you told me this is Carla with a conscience, I would actually kind of believe it, the way she behaves. But I'm talking of Sadler, particularly Sadler, in this, the original Sadler would call him a cliche. He feels like he is basically Miranda 2.
Yes.
And I don't like that. I liked the idea that he was a scheming Machiavellian, a proper megalomaniac who just wants power. The cult is just a facade to get more power.
Yes.
Now, he's a diehard believer of said cult, and it basically has rewritten his entire character. Salazar very much is like a quiet, annoying pain in the bum who only starts saying his original lines in his boss fight. He's just a tedious annoyance. I feel like those two, being the pivotal villains of the cult, have been mishandled kind of badly. Browser, I feel like if I was in charge, the way that fight goes down and how integral he is to Leon's story, especially, so it seems like, I'm not sure if exactly right, but Operation Javier seems to have been a completely botched operation this time around. Like, I don't know if Manuel has died and 20 other men died in the process, but it's definitely left its mark on Leon and Krauser. I feel like the Krauser boss fight should have been the ending fight with how much they are integral to each other's plot. That would have been a massive rewrite.
Yeah.
Vocally, I would argue he's probably a little bit too Cobra Commander. That's more. I think that's more the vocal direction going for 80s bad guy. Like, but the fact that he has so much more depth to him as a person, as opposed to just a bit of a git who Leon knew, it's a shame that it's not like the capping off of the journey. Instead, we get, I am Miranda too. Look at my squiddly bits. Besiege my insects. Like, I understand how and what they're going for, and the fact they've established that Los Illuminados is now Sadler's, basically the family business, the family trade. But it's lost a bit of the magic for me. I appreciate the fact that Lewis has got his own law room, though. Every Resident Evil game needs a law room now. That's definitely a thing, right? So yeah, it's mixed for me. Ada particularly, I love the scene she gets at the end where we basically get definitive no, screw you, Mr. Wesker.
Yeah.
But up until then, she doesn't feel like Ada to me. Just feels like a mean lady Leon once knew. I don't feel the same conflict of love and hate between Leon and Ada we usually get, if that makes any sense. I realise I'm probably rambling at 1,000 words a minute, but yeah, I feel like the mishandling of characters is probably the only bugbear with this game really that I have, besides that one gameplay niggle I mentioned earlier. End scene.
No, I agree, especially with Krauser. Like, this was something that I was alluding to earlier. And similarly, it might not be that big of a deal now that we've kind of received word that the remakes apparently, and I'm still waiting on further confirmation of this, that they take place in their own continuity. Then it's kind of okay, because it seems really weird to me that they would name drop Operation Javier, get me really excited in that first boss fight, and then when you read his little lore room, they've actually changed what Operation Javier actually was. I'm like, what? Who are all these men that died? It was a 2-man job and they both got out. Like, what are you talking about? So that is a massive, massive misstep for me. If it's a separate timeline, then it's kind of forgivable and okay, whatever, that's all right. If it's not, then, well, you can't have both. Like, that's a canon issue right there, and a big one, because it completely informs his character arc in this game in a different way, and it doesn't match up in the slightest. So there's definitely more they could have done. With Krauser in general, I felt like he would have had more of a presence since he is randomly inserted in RE4. And they had a chance to do a bit more with it here, other than being in the opening cutscene. I felt like he was going to get a bit more to do, but not so much the case. I also, just for the record, completely agree with everything everybody is saying about the other bad guys, but I don't need to harp on about it. So, Jordan, how do you feel about the characters in the game?
Well, first of all, just to cover a little bit about Sadler as well. It's a big sort of disappointment because Sadler was infuriating in the original game. Like, you knew you could take him, but he was always out of reach. But he kept having, one over you. So by the time that you actually get to sort of facing him, you really want to knock him down quite a few pegs. But you get a decent amount of exposure throughout the story to Sadler. I just don't think that it necessarily sort of came across that strong, or he was not really infuriating in the slightest. And I don't know if that's necessarily just down to how it's presented, or if it's down to partly the performance. I mean, it's a bit weird because I think it's been quite unfair exactly how much Lily Gao has sort of faced the brunt of criticisms for this game, the few that there are, with regards to her performance as Ada Wong. First of all, I didn't think she was bad at all. I think she was quite good. I think all of the actors were capable of having some flat scenes, to be quite honest. Although I think the most sort of disappointing sort of dynamic, I think, was between Leon and Ashley. I felt that there was a very, very much a lack of chemistry there, despite the fact that they're going through this ordeal together for so much of the game. But most of their interactions really kind of either come down to, we're going to get through this, okay? or they come down to a fun, playful, yeah, we, open the door, or, way to go, we make a good team. It was, I don't know, it was just a bit milquetoast for the opportunity there to kind of build something a little bit sort of greater, kind of add a little bit more weight to how much that they've went through. They obviously have handled sort of grounding the characters quite well, considering so many of these sort of characters were very different in the original. But that was just an opportunity missed for me. But there were a couple of, standout performances. Really liked Louis Serra. Obviously, he's one of those characters that you really like sort of in the original anyway, and you wanted to see more of. And this game obliges in the best way. All of his scenes are pretty fantastic, and I warmed to him near immediately. The Merchant's great, despite the fact that it is a different voice actor, so it's not that specific voice. It's funny to see people kind of complain. It's like, oh, he doesn't even say, "What are you buying?" And it's like, he does. It's just he has so many more lines now.
Yes.
In fact, he won't shut up.
Yes.
He's got so much to say, and so if you're really in it for some Merchant talk, oh, you're going to get it. Merchant is practically doing his own podcast. While you're shopping,
I'd listen.
He's got something to say. So I really like that. I'm really split on how I feel about Ramon Salazar, because the thing is, the original is great. It's so scenery chewing and so sort of ridiculous. There are shades of it in the boss fight more. I don't like the design at all of Remake Ramon Salazar. Sort of, I don't know what's going on with the Margaret Thatcher hairdo and everything. I feel like it's one of those character designs they really didn't have to touch at all, because it's weird, because it's like people like Sadler are barely touched. And so I don't know why they went in such a different direction. But that was one where I was kind of like, that's a bit hit or miss. I mean, it's boss fight's great, but just the character was a bit sort of flat. So, yeah, there were a couple of moments where, and the remakes kind of suffered with this a few times. Less so in Remake 3, but I think Remake 2 and Remake 4 are capable of having opportunities where the bond between characters could be grown, especially if they're going through conflict. And I think there's a bit of a struggle to quite sort of sort of hit the mark, and that was especially the case I found with Leon and Ashley.
Fair, that's fair. Salazar and Sadler have big Janosch Pohar and Vigo the Carpathian energy. So that's a Ghostbusters 2 reference for all 5 people out there that'll appreciate that. And as much as that was my favourite movie for 30 odd years, even I would admit that Vigo needed more screen time, and so does Sadler, for sure. Salazar's thing for me, and I actually disagree, Steve, I like that they took out the hack of the voice calls. The thing about it is, I'm glad they did it, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense on how he's able to do it. But the problem is, they didn't replace it with anything. Like,
he's got
it works
a few
for
like
the time.
trumpet things, hasn't he?
Right, you get that once, and then that's it, and that's his problem with presence. Like, he feels very missing. I actually do. I really like his design in this game, but yeah, it's just a lack of show for both of these guys. I'm really glad you mentioned everything that you did about the Merchant, Jordan, because obviously in our RE4 OG podcast, we went like a million hours and didn't even talk about him. So I'm glad we at least brought him up. And you're so right. Like I love him. He's great, but he's almost too chatty. Like, I'm trying to sit and compare numbers, and he's waffling on. I'm like, shut up for a second, please. But no, he's great. I love him in the shooting gallery, and this goes for everyone, because you can take Ashley and Luis into the shooting gallery. It's all really fun to hear them all chiming in as well. He's awesome. I love New Merchant, and I'm really looking forward to, and here's your prediction, playing as the Merchant in Mercenaries, please. Because of that new voice as well, he'd be great. And also, while we're here, new Wesker's awesome, infinitely better than the last Wesker. We don't even have to question it. We know why. Let's move on. James, how do you feel about the characters to close this out?
I want to make you cry about Luis a second.
Oh, no.
So, Luis says the famous line from the original, which is I'm kind of a ladies' man, or variation of that. And I had a theory because they focused on Luis and Ada's story a bit more. Not much, but a little bit. And the fact that he was basically working for her, in turn working for Wesker. Luis probably didn't know that. Probably won't know until Separate Ways if that comes out. But I had a theory that Luis only thinks he's a ladies' man because Ada Wong
flirts with
basically
him.
gaslit him.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Right.
That's
And,
tragic.
Because he's a mask, right?
Yeah.
He's complete mask. Like he has this confidence, right? But he has such a lovely personality. Like when he, like, you know, the bit with the Don Quixote like kind of line that he does. Like I feel like that's the real Luis that you see there.
It's almost childlike.
Yeah, like, you know, it's a nerd, right? It's like he is a scientist.
Nerd, yeah.
He's a nerd, and, like, you know, there's a couple other things he says. Like in the lift, he says harsh for a squire, you know, and it's just very, very. Every time he says stuff like that, it gets me bubbling because it's yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I really like Ada. I really like her character. I think she's got way more. Instead of just being this femme fatale, boring character, she actually does have some angles to her. Like, you know, I mean, and at the end we see that she completely, like, goes against her orders, like, that she's given, and says no. Like, which I hope we get more of in Separate Ways again, if that's coming. I really like the voice actor. I really, you know, her character is great. I do want more. I don't want Separate Ways. I think it's pretty much certain we're gonna get it, right? Because, I mean, it's said twice in the game.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, like, I hope in Separate Ways it's not like the old Separate Ways where it doesn't tell us anything about Ada. You know, we want to know more about Ada because Ada is, next to Chris Redfield, my least favorite character, right? Because she just doesn't have any dimension to her. Like, it's fine. You can keep making a story. You can keep saying, oh, she's an assassin for hire. And, you know, she's just this, oh, you'll never know. But, you know, give us something. You know, give us something there. Yeah, for her. In terms of Leon, yeah, one of my points was the thrill rides thing, Sai, because when I heard that, again, that was another thing that made me kind of tear up a little bit, because I was like, oh, God damn it, Leon. Because after the Louis Serra segment, you actually see Leon, I don't know why I said it like that, you see Leon not relax, but kind of give a bit more in terms of what his personality is. And you see a little bit more of Leon from RE2, like just the goofy guy. You know, and he's not like he's not like the original. He just, you know, he says some goofy things sometimes, especially with Ashley. I would disagree with Jordan. I really liked Ashley and Leon's relationship. Leon, it was nice to see a juxtaposition because Leon was the unobtainable. It felt like. And Ashley was a young girl who seemed to try and obtain Leon. Right? But Leon was literally being a professional. You know, and I saw that with each of their conversations. Like, yes, he saw her, like, slightly as a mark, but also as somebody who he needs to protect. That line of saying, you know, I can't let it happen again, or paraphrasing, I can't remember what it was.
This time it has to be different.
Yeah, oh God, that line. I remember when it first popped up, my first playthrough, this time I went, what do you mean? Oh. You know, because through all this time, I've been, you know, just been killing guys all over the place. Sorry for swearing. You know, and then it gets to that point, I'm like, oh, now it's real again. You know? Yeah, so it's especially because the island was such a gun-toting adventure, you know, just constantly running and getting to Ashley. That was your plan. Sorry, there was something else. Oh yeah, so the chopper mic section. I don't understand that section, like, and why it was put in the game. There's a bit at the end, and I think it's exactly the same as the remake, right? There's a bit at the end, just before he gets blown out the sky. No, Navistador's chomp on his helicopter, and then he crashes. He says, "Oh yeah, get in the chopper. I'll go get us a drink." Was Leo seriously thinking about leaving? Like, I don't understand. Like, was he seriously thinking about just going and leaving? What was the point of us playing 18 hours of this game?
He's done.
Yeah, he's,
and Leon was like, "Oh yeah, brother, let's go." He's like, I just didn't. It was so dumb.
Yeah,
I didn't understand that section at all. Yeah, and like it was really hype when it started and Chopper Mike came in. Oh, look, it's Chopper Mike, and he was super cool, and like it was nice hearing his goofy voice. And it was like listening to the original game again. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just there was something missing about it. It is my least favorite part of the island. Mm-hmm. It feels like a slog, and then you get to the end, and it's just stupid. I don't know. I think I should probably add this to BOWs, but could I add the Ganados as characters, or should I just talk about it?
BOWs is next, so go for it.
So I just go straight in.
Let's do
Okay.
it.
Right, we're BOWs now, guys. I have several, but I'll go quickly. So the Ganados are the first plagas infected people you come across, and there's something they say which is really interesting, and it was thanks to Netro in chat. We were talking and trying to figure out what they're saying, but there is a phrase they say. I think it's a prisa, and they constantly say it, and it means quickly, and then there's more words after that, right? When you're in the Luis Serra siege, you constantly hear it, and it gets like a higher and higher pitch, terrifying points. Like, it really scared me, like, because they were just screaming. I hate that kind of surround sound. Like, it was like a sensory overload, right? But it was amazingly done. And I think like that, like them saying quickly is like, we need to get them quickly.
Yeah.
That was basically the undertone thoughts of Osmond Sadler. So all these words you keep hearing from these Ganados, from all these infected, like, they're just like the passing thoughts of Osmond Sadler, because that's how this plaga works. He's in complete control of this hive, as it were. And you're hearing these things. That's why they don't really make sense, because I was wondering why it doesn't really make sense in the translation. So yeah, Ganados are great. And I love the fact that, again, Netro helped me with this as well. They're genuine. Like, those accents you hear are genuine. They're not offensive.
Yeah.
Like the original is. And I love that. And I know that's not really talking about the BOWs themselves, but I think, yeah, I'll focus on that for them. Del Lago, hate it. I hate that BOW, right? In professional, I have hit that thing 12 times, right, with a harpoon and completed it, right? I just recently, like yesterday, I went against Del Lago. I hit that thing 28 times and I didn't kill it.
Yep.
Right? Steve brought up a really good point about it having weak points. But I am not sure. I have tried to hit its head. I've tried to hit its tail. It doesn't matter where I freaking hit this thing, right? I've must have gone against this thing, and multiple times as well. Must have gone against this thing like tens of times now. I'm trying to test it out, but I don't know how that bloody thing works. The RNG is crazy. It sometimes bugs out, and if you hit it too many times, it bugs out and starts to kind of just do whirlpools. Goes around and around and around, and you just swing around and hit trees, right? Because you can't do anything. So that's my thought on Del Lago. Salazar, I really like Salazar's design. He reminds me of the Carrion monster from the game Carrion, if anybody's seen that.
Yeah.
It's a really cool design. It's basically using these like tentacle sucker, bloody, fleshy appendages to stick itself to things. It reminded me of him. Yeah, I would have liked to kind of see more of him, like the transformation, because you don't see that. And I would have liked to see that. I tell you what, I'll let other people talk about the Regenerators, but I want to quickly say the Colmillos, the dogs. I think that's how you pronounce that, right, Intro? They look goofy as hell. I don't like.
Yeah,
them.
they do.
Like
they do.
They look like God. What was that show? That puppet show. There was like a big mouth. Oh, it was actually, I'm not gonna mention that name because he's a butthole. But it reminded me of an old Muppet show. And yeah, they look really, really dumb. That's my take on BOWs.
Fair. I actually have to say that I thought the Ganados were less creepy in this game than the original for the most part. I thought they were really strong. I just thought the chanting in the original game I just think it's a lot scarier, especially the zealots and stuff, as they just constantly chant and chant and chant. It's really, really creepy. In this, less so much. In fact, the one that stands out the most, Gloria la Plaga, is just mostly annoying. But beyond that, they are great. You know, they feel really good as a horde. The gore from them is great. The transformations that they go through is really, really good. They are a really, really strong standard enemy. So big fan of that. And also just going to throw in that Del Largo is rubbish. It's definitely the worst boss fight in the game. The original is arguably better. It's been a long time since I did it, but I would imagine it's better because I don't enjoy this every time. I've stopped several playthroughs and just had to come back to them later because I just hate going up against this boss fight that takes your agency away. It's just not so much. And this is the difference between it and the Donkey Kong Country segment, is that you don't just change the weapon. Like, you get given a stupid rubbish harpoon, you don't know how it works, but also you can't move either, and it just goes on forever because you can't determine where you can move around a little bit to try and dodge things, but there are just moments where it's like, well, I just couldn't dodge that. I had no.
It feels like the illusion of agency.
Yeah, it's really
yeah.
sucky, and it feels out of place in that way. I also won't necessarily go on too much, but I did want to at least say in our last podcast episode, we've monkey pawed it. We were like #bring back bugs. And the Navistadors are awesome and they look so cool and the camo's great. It looks really good. But man, they can be annoying. They're everywhere in this game. They're just like, even in the final boss fight, you know, I was really surprised by that. It's cool, but they are irritating sometimes. Jordan, how do you feel about BOWs in this game? What are your standouts for good or for worse?
With regards to the Granadas, it's a bit of a weird one because I feel like we've been spoiled by the core enemies in Remake 2 and 3, in that they made zombies scary again, like really quite intimidating. And obviously Granados, they're generally meant to be sort of tackled as a sort of a crowd, as a group and that. They're all right. I do like things like the way that they, charge more sort of readily now. Some of the animations were sort of like a bit less creepy though. I always liked, in the original, the fact that they were at their most sort of frantic and sort of jittery before transformation into Plagas, basically. And yet once they did sort of burst out with Plagas at the top of their head, they're all really still.
Yes. And
very, very methodic. And it was always creepy to me because it was kind of like, it was a case of, before it was sort of like, these are sort of, sort of a shambling horde of villagers that, they're a bit sort of inefficient and that. But once the Plaga sort of breaks out, it's heat-seeking. It's after you. And it's suddenly in full control. It doesn't have to sort of worry about the human body. It's just a vessel to get from where it is to you. So I really liked that from the original, and it was it's not like it's a big difference, it's just they shamble a whole lot more. And it's especially goofy when you use things like the bolt gun on them, and they're constantly, falling backwards, like, whoa, It's a little bit sort of silly. But obviously there's lots of really good animations, lots of really cool, like, sort of falling animations, which can make you laugh a little bit, like, especially if you're very tactical and you just basically fight near stairs all the time. you get half your work done just because people will keep falling downstairs. I also really sort of detested the Novistadors. I just felt embarrassed by it because, despite the fact that they bash you over the head with the fact that they camouflage, they bed in just about anywhere, above you, below you, and they could come flying through a window or stuff like that. But obviously, primarily, they camouflage themselves, and yet, like Sideshow Bob, running into every raid. I ran into every Novistador and I took a hit from every single one of them. And it's so annoying because it's kind of like, I suppose I sort of took it as because they don't necessarily harm you substantially compared to some other enemies. You kind of feel like, oh, it's not worth sort of taking this step by step and going really kind of careful. And as such, I just ended up running into every single one of them. And the bugs got me every single time. They constantly surprise me. It's like Arrested Development, Gene Parmesan. I was like, yeah, they got me again. It's like, am I never going to spot like that weird sort of greenish grey mass that's literally 5 feet in front of me? It's like, is there ever going to be a time where I just actually shoot it? But so I got caught out on that a lot. I thought that Regenerators and Iron Maidens remained sort of as strong as they sort of ever were. I especially like the graphical fidelity that is lent to the Iron Maidens and their spikes. Like, I don't know, I always hated those spikes in the original, and there's even more of them now. I don't know, it's a horrid image. I actually enjoyed the Krauser fight a bit more as well. Both Krauser fights I think were sort of a bit stronger in this. Besides that, I think more or less. Oh wait, no, sorry. The Red Zealots.
Yeah,
hated it. It's just there's that one particular room where I can't remember which head of the Manticore
the library
you're getting, but it's
yeah
that's the room, and I couldn't wait to get to that guy. In fact, I didn't take him out in long range because I genuinely just wanted to go up and beat the bleep out of him.
Amazing.
So they're great because I know just how annoying they are. And the only other shout out is to Salazar. I actually quite liked the fight against Salazar for more reasons than just the boss fight itself. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, did I use the rocket launcher too many times in my original RE4 playthroughs? I don't know. It stood out more. So
yeah, there's a bunch of stuff there that I have to agree with. Talking about Ganados in the original RE4, you talking about them, and we suddenly realised what's so creepy about them is, and you especially notice this if you're using like a long range weapon, as they sort of walk towards you and you pop their head, they just keep walking, and then the plaga comes out. They just don't stop. They just keep walking, and you get far less of that in this game. I don't think I even saw it once. It might not be in this game. I have no idea. I certainly didn't notice it. Oh, it is? Okay, yeah. Well, I think that might be down to just obviously the way the game plays differently and the camera and stuff like that. Okay, fair enough. But it's a lot more obvious in the original game, certainly. For me, I'm going to go into the Regenerator conversation now. I love that they can grab you from such a distance. That's terrifying. And also, if you buy the character model of both that and the Iron Maiden, the way they wobble is just awful. They're just disgusting. But they're way less creepy. I thought they were way less scary. I think the audio is not necessarily as oppressive. The raspy breathing, you get far less of it. So the actual sort of dread, I guess is probably the right word, of coming across them felt far lesser for me, because it was all about that oppressive audio in the original game, and you don't get that here so much, unfortunately. So them being like the scariest thing of the original game and feeling toned down certainly has an overall effect on the horror in the remake, I feel like. Steve, how do you feel about the BOWs in the game?
Genuinely, I'm still stunned at how consistent they are with their original counterparts, for the most part. The only one of the main basic enemy roster that's been dropped, I feel, is JJ, right? It's been replaced with Gauntlet Brute.
Yes, they've got names as well, those things, but I can't think what they are. They're just called Brutes. It's just Brutes, yeah. I think it is.
I honestly find that the slightly buff Ganado with a cow for a head is just terrifying. And a force
I
to be
love that
reckoned
more
with.
than I love that a lot more.
It shouldn't be. You know, the Chainsaw Man's meant to be the more iconic enemy, but for some reason, like I see the cow head and I'm like, oh god, he's going to take 40 million Magnum rounds. And it's great. It's great. Also, personally, the Red Zealot terrifies me in the best possible way. Like the way seeing all these other Plaga heads sprouted around me. Not only was that a genuine threat, I thought, if I take too long, does Leon just die? Does he just become one or something? I felt like I was on the clock. Because the pad's vibrating each time, like your heart's beating, and it's like, ah! So yeah, anxiety and dread from them is also, horrible in the best possible way. And I'm very much like Jordan. I had to get close and beat that man to death. It's cruel when Capcom put them out of arm's reach during like the clock tower sequence. But generally, yes, get close murder. It's fun. Other than that, I absolutely detest the Salazar boss fight for some of its cheapness. Like, I appreciate it, and the carrion monster is a great shout, the way it moves around. Aesthetically, I think they've reworked it fantastically.
Yeah.
And I would think it would be fantastic if it weren't for the fact that he seems to have a move that can hit you from the other side of the screen, an instant kill move that can just get you in 2 seconds if he feels like it, and he can combo into it. I feel like it's not been balanced properly. This could be like scrub quotes all day.
Yeah.
You know, I was salty as heck launch night fighting this thing, to the point now where I'm going to buy a rocket launcher every time. And other than that, Sadler I think has been improved quite a lot. The original Sadler fight was the one where here's every possible mechanic and interactable thing you could possibly do in the game.
Right.
Have at it and wreck him. Now it's the same, but he's massive and breaks the arena apart and occasionally summons like hordes. Though the standout probably is still Krauser round 1. Basically, you now need to know how to use the game's newest mechanic.
Yeah.
And it's done to great effect, if a little stressful on the harder difficulty settings. So all in all, gameplay-wise, I know I griped about the no-selling of certain attacks, but that's literally the only gameplay gripe I had besides, like, you know, rubbish side content that's like shoot medals or rats. That's a different issue entirely anyway. The horde of BOWs you shoot through, pretty solid. And it's amazing how much they hold up because a lot of them are the same.
Yeah, there is that as well. I think that's important that they changed the things that need changing and kept the things as needed to stay the same as essentially the same. The Gyarados are really fun to fight. They are essentially the same thing, but now with the sort of new additions that you've got, they're really fun. Like just taking one out with just a knife, which is quite easy to do when it's just the one of them. When it's the two of them, it's a nightmare. But if you do the one with just the knife, that's really fun, just sneaking around him. And obviously, Verdugo, or Daddy Dugo, as I've called him once, and apparently now that's now sticking. So that's a future T-shirt. Again, just exactly how it was before, which is exactly what it needed to be. For me, the changes, the Salazar boss fight, I'm not a massive fan of it. I don't quite hate it as much as you, but admittedly, I've only done it once without a rocket launcher, so that's going to be fun to try and do sort of standard again. But the design, you're right, the design is great on that one, certainly. I'm trying to think if there's any other major changes. Not particularly.
There is a lack of U3, and
yes.
There's a Verdugo who has gone missing.
Well, see, this is the thing, right? The U3 is now implied to be the Verdugo in the lore.
True.
But there is a Verdugo that's missing, and I do expect that's probably DLC fodder that they've done on purpose.
Yeah,
so, yeah,
I think it's Ada's boss fights.
Yeah, it works for me.
One extra aspect of the enemies I wanted to talk about was the Dr. Salvador, the Bella Sisters. Just one little thing which I quite liked. I don't know if the original had this because I never experienced this. But even after you kill them, if they're sort of like shaking about on the floor, the chainsaw can still hurt you if you happen to walk over it. I learned that in the mines, and I was like, wait, what just got me? There was literally nothing next to me except the lady with a chainsaw. Oh, and I liked that. That was a nice touch. But that was it. It was just a nice touch.
Speaking of which, actually, what's really funny, the first time I played through the game, I bought one rocket launcher and didn't use it. I was like, well, I'm at the final boss now, so I used it against Sadler's final form. So the first time I played the game, I didn't even have Ada throw me the special rocket launcher, and I thought they'd cut the scene. Like, no, I just beat them to it. When I played through it and did the handgun only thing. I was like, oh yeah, no, there it is. So that's the thing. Kelsey, to round us out with BOWs before we move on, how do you feel about them, the
Sure.
Beasties?
My favourites are Nikki and Brie, the Bella twins. I think I think their reveal is so good. I love that cutscene.
Yeah.
And then that section of gameplay is really fun as well. I am slightly annoyed, and I know this happened in the original, that Salvador and the Bella, or one of them, appears again later. I just wish that they'd have just stayed as single appearance mini bosses. It becomes a bit video gamey when they reuse it. So that's a shame. But I mean, what I've said before, chainsaws just don't lose their charm. And I think, yeah, it's incredible. Leon as well. I'm a one woman kind of guy. Like, who's he talking about there? I don't know. But yeah, I am a big fan of the Los Illuminatus monk, which that new mechanic added a fun twist. First, when I went into that room and he started chanting, I thought, you know, those chains that are hanging from the ceiling with the spikes on? I thought I was walking into them and they were causing me damage, and I thought, I've got to avoid them. And it wasn't until I got like 5 minutes later into the room and saw him chanting, I was like, oh no, he's messing with my head. So I loved that new mechanic, and the way he just kind of like hunches down and scurries away like a little chicken is, yeah, it's infuriating. And like, you know, you guys have said, chasing him down and finishing him off is very, very kind of like satisfying. So yeah, loved the Bella twins, loved the Illuminatus monk. Varduk, Daddy Dugo, you've covered. You know, what's not to love about that. Mendez was my favourite boss fight, I think, because Salazar, you've mentioned, is just run and shoot. And Sadler boss fight is kind of the same, just with a bit more, with the horde stuff. But I liked the Mendez boss fight. It felt there was a bit more sort of tactical stuff going on. I loved his little whirlwind spin, which the first time I played through I didn't get, but playing through on hardcore, where he takes a bit longer to take down, he sort of does this thing where he spins round like a whirlwind in that first stage of his boss fight, and that was really, really cool. Was it James that mentioned the dogs as well? Completely, they reminded me of the aliens from Attack the Block, where they're just all black with teeth, and really unimaginative. I didn't really like their new placements that they had was kind of cool and surprising, but yeah, not a big fan. You guys have all covered it really. The boss fight's a little bit underwhelming, but I think we've all got our favourite little BOWs along the way. And yeah, just still love chainsaws. I think, you can't beat them.
Yeah, do you know what's fun about those monks, by the way, is that when you go on harder difficulties, they move around.
Yeah.
So, like on the harder difficulties on the elevator, for instance, like, he's not going to be in the same place.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it's a pain in the...
Yeah, I love them. And their chants, of, that Gloria Las Plagas is, I think it's amazing.
May, 9 years since my awakening. Upon the release of this valve, black liquid shall enter my veins and circulate throughout my entire body. I expect this will be the most painful experience of my life. I await the trial with great anticipation. It is an honor to suffer through the holy labor of rebirth. The next time I awaken, it will be as a true servant of Master Ramon. I, Isidro Urarte de la Vera, make this vow. I will surpass the limitations of man and become a true servant of God. I will find the heretics and serve as their executioner, their verdugo.
Okay, let's talk about the way the game looks, the way the game sounds. This is sort of one of our last port of calls here. Kelsey, I'm going to put it to you first. How do you think about, the general aesthetic of Remake 4, wherever you want to go with it?
So this is a game that I think at times looks really state of the art. It's beautiful, like beautiful settings. The cutscenes I've kind of touched on already. They're on another planet of production. Like it's some of the best direction in Resident Evil you'll ever see. So, huge credit to the actors and stuff in the mocap, but the cinematography of the cutscenes and the editing, it's really high quality. And it's on par with movies. This wants to be an action movie, and it kind of made me think, well, if they decided not to remake the game, we could have just got a new CG movie that was RE4, because the sort of the prowess that's gone into it and the direction is jaw-dropping at times. And I mentioned the Lewis and Leon scene and stuff like that. So yeah, there's so much in there. That being said, the game is like riddled with technical issues, which I think, in all honesty, it doesn't ruin the experience, but it definitely put a dampener on it for me. And I think ignoring it would kind of be a bit biased. So while playing this game, like, I experienced quite a few crashes, loss of sound. The floor disappeared a couple of times. Weird bugs with arrows floating around me. There's texture popping in some of the cutscenes as well. And I know that this isn't just an Xbox thing, because I've watched, tech breakdowns, and there's different issues on each platform. And I think, while we all agree, and I think that everyone probably agrees, that the game generally looks amazing and the RE engine continues to do things that are, unique and high quality, there was quite a few bugs in this which did frustrate me a little bit. And that's just me trying to be, honest about what I experienced, because I'm always singing the praises of this engine, but there was definitely some odd moments in this. And I think they had a mammoth task with the game. They've mostly pulled it off. You can see that they're pushing the technology to its limits, and it's just resulted in these frustrating little bits, which, I can ignore. And, we live in a time where games are releasing broken all the time. This isn't broken, but it's maybe not as polished as I would have liked it to be. It maybe just needed another month or so. I don't know. But, ignoring that, just from an art design perspective, it's a photo mode dream most of the time. And cinematography, as I say, just had my mouth on the floor. The locations are full of depth. The characters have soul. And despite the action being the focus, I think the visuals are a huge reason for that atmosphere and tone being, more what I'm looking for from a Resident Evil game, and, wanting to get sucked into kind of every nook and cranny. And I think, this game, it retains a lot of horror, and the visuals are a big part of that. So, it looks beautiful. I had a few comments about audio, which should I just quickly go into them now, or do you want to
go for it?
Them?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so audio, I mean, I haven't been able to sort of sit and listen to the soundtrack. I don't think it's out, but from what you can hear, audio in this game is incredible. No right to go this hard, I think, is the phrase that people like to say. Some of my favorite bullet points here. So, Shooting Range Remix, that's already on my gym playlist.
It's great.
It's just amazing. The gun sounds, the blood sounds, the screeches. There's music wise, there's Dark Souls all over it, and that's not just because I've been playing Dark Souls recently. I think Leon even opens the doors like the character in Dark Souls in this game, so we know that they're referencing the game. Or despite the Del Lago boss fight being frustrating, the theme it's amazing. It's perfect horror monster stuff. If you can go and listen to that new Del Lago theme, this is one of my favorite RE tracks in a long time. I picked the Del Lago theme on mine. Now that's what we call survival horror for the original RE4.
Yeah.
This, excuse the pun, just blows out of the water. This is so good. It's got the classic brass notes, classic Resident Evil. I didn't really notice it until maybe my second playthrough, because I've played through once and I'm playing through on hardcore at the moment. But so I was doing Del Lago a lot more on hardcore, and I really, really heard it. But absolutely loved it. The Krauser fight theme, funnily enough, this is weird. It's something that popped into my head, but it sounds like, if you go and listen to it, it sounds like Danny Elfman's Spider-Man theme, but amped up. And that sounds like a really silly thing to say, but that Danny Elfman theme is an amazing piece of music, and it's very similar here. And we know that this game is looking at big action movies all the time, superheroes, Mission Impossible, and all that kind of stuff. And I think the big action notes are all over it. So, I wanted to touch on those visual bugs. I think, everyone knows they're net, everyone knows that they're there, and everyone's going to have a different experience. But this feels like it feels very, very top quality. It feels a little bit unpolished in places, but I loved it. It looks great and it sounds great. So just, huge credit to the game developers and all that. There's so much to enjoy about the visuals and the overall presentation.
I'm going to be careful what I say now because it's going to make it sound like I'm licking boots a little bit, but I did want to say something because this is the first major release that I've had the opportunity to play early, and it was an interesting one with Resident Evil 4 because Capcom, everyone talked about it at the time, then now everyone's shut up about it. But when the embargo lifted, it became sort of public knowledge that Capcom had asked for reviewers to just use some specific footage, capture your own, but you only use these parts of the game. And a lot of people, quite rightfully, because in the gaming, community, and we've got history to back this up, that's sometimes the case to be worried that a studio doesn't want reviewers to show specific things, or only show specific things, that maybe the game is a broken mess. And a lot of people got really, really worried. And as someone who had access to the game, my experience early, before the day one patch, my experience is completely different to yours. Not to invalidate your experience. I've seen your screenshots, absolutely. So it was funny for me to see people being like, oh no, this game's going to be a mess. Why would Capcom do this otherwise? And I had to be like, no, listen to the review scores. They're not being paid off or anything. It's a great time. And you've even said yourself, despite the issues, the game's not broken by any means. You still enjoyed it regardless. I think it's just a shame that everyone got really freaked out about that and said some stupid stuff, and then the game comes out and we all forget about it. And it's like, you probably should think back on what you did there and overreacting beforehand. I know it's an isolated case and I know what that makes me sound like, but it was a shame as someone that was playing the game being like, no, it's not that bad. I can only speak with my personal experience. Before the day one patch, I only really had one issue. I've not had any issues at all since playing on a PS5. Maybe I've just gotten really, really lucky in the 60 hours I put in. I imagine so. I've mostly, admittedly, played on performance mode over resolution. That's probably a factor as well, of course. So I at least wanted to say that much. I'll get into some other stuff myself, between other people, but I wanted to let someone else have a chance to jump in next. James, how do you feel about the way the game looks and the way the game sounds?
I want to just follow on from both what you said, Sai and Kels. Like, I have put almost 70 hours into this game now, and on PC, on my again swearing, PC, sorry, but I've only ever seen really some weird graphical glitches, like coats going weird and stuff. Like I remember Ashley's coat a lot, like sometimes during scenes would just go up over her head for some reason. Okay, which was weird. So that was really immersive breaking. And then it was actually only yesterday I had my very first crash that broke the game, and it was really weird how I replicated it. The gate that you open up just before the chopper mic section, I paused it because I needed to see to Rowan because she was being a loudmouth in the kitchen, who's my cat, by the way. And the game just crashed. It just froze in that moment. And then I came out of the game because it let me go into the pause menu, came out, and I actually took a screenshot of it, which I'll put up on Twitter later on. But it gave me a new title screen, but it was a freeze of mountains.
What? Okay.
Yeah, it was really strange, but I couldn't go beyond that point. Right, so I had to Alt F4 out the game, and then I went back, and it was fine. Right, so it's very, very strange. Yes, but other than that, I've not really had any problems, and I was expecting to have a lot of problems, because my PC's getting really old now. But as usual, I want to kind of congratulate Capcom yet again on optimization. And I'm gonna boo and hiss every other games company. Because I can play this game at 1080, 60 frames per second, absolutely flawlessly, and stream it at that, right? And which, by the way, is no small feat. That's a really big deal. And other games are really, really far behind in optimization, but the RE engine is so good when it comes to that. In terms of being in the game itself, incredible immersive visuals throughout the game. The game does a great job, or rather the visuals do a great job of immersing you into this region that looks like it's been lived in for potentially thousands of years. Like there's overgrowth everywhere. Like you feel like this is old country. Like I don't think I said it in the RE4 OG podcast, right? Because I think we didn't really have any other comparisons. But when you kind of look, and you know, obviously tech was worse back then, or didn't get to the same point we are now. But you try and compare these two games to each other in terms of visuals, and it's wild, like how much they've just added. Like, and I'm not talking about just how things look, but how busy scenes are. Like the levels are themselves. They've added so much that just make you feel like you're there. They transport you into that world. I think you guys have said. Oh yeah, there's the hair thing.
Yes.
So we can't get hair right. It's like Waterback from 2010. We can't get hair right, and there's like a Hairworks thing, like there was with Witcher 3. With this game, but the hair looks worse than the 2D layered hair. Somehow, it looks better on PC, but still looks worse. Like in my opinion, than the 2D hair. Like if you are really down and get really hard for like floppy hair, right? Then maybe it's good for you. But yeah, 2D hair wins. For me, and I don't think I'm the only one here that thinks that. They've gone really hard, and they've like done really well with the BOWs. They look gross, like the broken neck Ganados. Just like the way they hiss. That's another thing I wanted to mention. Actually, I'll do that in audio, but
well, I mean, it's all good.
All right, I was just going to audio then. So there are a lot of like kind of references to the original, and they've kind of gone really, really hardcore with them when it comes to the audio. Like the broken neck guys, and even when you sometimes you kill just the normal Ganados, they have that like buzzsaw hissing sound that they make, which really creeped me out when I was playing the original, and it creeped me out like when you're in the chief's the village chief's house, and you do the puzzle, and then you come back in, I just hear the hissing and the buzzing, and I'm like, I hate it. And for some reason, that guy is like way more aggressive than a normal one. I don't know what's up with him, what his deal is, but the gunshots in this game, everything sounds different, everything sounds amazing. It's got mega bass to it, and just crazy, very weighty. I love it. I'll say it again because I think it bears repeating, but the genuine voice actors in this game for the region that they're from, right, or even the country that they're from, is a big two thumbs up from me, and should be for everybody else as well. Because it's not just the Ganados, it's everybody else as well. Everybody sounds so genuine. It might be why they don't sound as intimidating, because they sound more natural. Potentially. Another thing that I'm very sensitive to certain sounds, and I don't know if you guys heard this, but the Regenerators, when they die, including the Iron Maidens, they make a buzzing sound like electricity is charging up. I don't know if anybody else has heard that. Anyone?
Nope.
No.
Oh, I will need to record it then, because there is definitely a buzzy sound, like they're charging up to explode. Like I found that fascinating because it made me think, why are they buzzing? Like, is there some kind of electrical charge system inside them that makes them do that? But yeah, cool anyway. In terms of my favorite soundtracks, the El Gigante track is my absolute favorite, because it sounds basically like a normal boss track, but goes well, right? But then this freaking flute comes in, and it just, they've got a name on it. Is it a shawm? Maybe? Right? It just sounds like a rattly flute, and it's so good. And then there's the one I want to mention, just because it sounds like the Village Mercenaries track, is the Chopper Mike track. I call it. When you get to that section, there's a point just before you destroy the turret that sounds almost exactly like the Village Mercenary sound, the OST. And then there's the Final Fantasy track, the Salazar Choir track, right? Right, which sounds so epic, and it's just it's so good. When I first when that track came on, I was like, oh, Cloud, Tifa. I felt like they were just about to come in on my left and right, and we're just about to take this boss down. Fantastic audio. Like it's the music is one of my favorite things, other than the story and the gameplay about this game. As Kel said, it went very hard.
Seems like now might be the time for me to drop some controversial opinions then. I think that there are a few soundtrack moments in this game that are definitely a highlight. Overall, though, I thought the soundtrack to this game was pretty meh. I don't remember most of it, and I've played through the game already 6 times. Most of that is with the soundtrack that comes with the game. Few of them are just outright annoying and overly repetitive, I thought. That might change, hopefully, in time, but it didn't. It's definitely the game that I've got so much positive to say about, and I do want to absolutely sort of ram that home. Didn't care for the soundtrack whatsoever. This is definitely a classic soundtrack swap for me. I don't really have loads of nostalgia for RE4's original soundtrack, obviously, but playing through it with it again, like RE2's, was like, oh yes, I remember this. I remember that. Like, that was really a fun experience. I'm glad that that's included. It actually had more of an effect on me than I was expecting, regardless of my taste in the new soundtrack. As for the visuals, and this is probably just an indication that I need a good TV, a new TV. I don't think this game looks nearly as good as Remake 2 or 3. Which is weird because they're last gen games. But, of course, this game is much bigger. It's much quicker as well. And the areas of the game are much grander. So I have to forgive it for that. The fact that it runs so flawlessly, I never had any frame rate drops or any issues whatsoever in those regards. The only visual issue that I had that I referenced earlier was just coming down the ladder to the lake. Some of the lake didn't load in for a few seconds. That's about it. I think Village might even be a better looking game, but that is because you're closer to everything because it's first person. So it's not a massive leap than I was expecting, but maybe I shouldn't have expected a massive leap because it has to handle so many areas, all interconnected, so big, so fast moving. So, and again, as usual with me, these things do not put me off whatsoever. So while I say they're a negative, it didn't harm my experience. The soundtrack, maybe a little bit, but visually, I don't really care about these things already. I think I've made that evident anyway. So it didn't detract from my experience whatsoever. But when I went to study it, aside from being the Futurama alien that has no opinion one way or the other about the hair strand debate, the visuals yeah, they're great. And I got nothing more to say than, yeah, they're great. They're not as good as the other ones, but they're great. Also, death animations. The death animations are awesome. I will say that. They're awesome. The rain, as well, we got to mention Rain Gate, since we're talking about things on the lead to this game. Since the day one patch, it's definitely better than it was. It's still bad, but it's definitely better. Steve, visuals and audio, how do you feel?
Okay, well, I feel like everyone's already said everything that I was going to. But,
Sorry.
Yeah. No. When we think about the fact that, Beginning Hour came out in what? E3 time, 2016. This is, almost a 6-7-year-old engine now. Mm-hmm. Something like that. It's amazing how well it holds up. An incredible amount of gravitas to come in swinging with a hair toggle feature after seeing Mia's hair in RE7. Just saying. That's some. There are some brass balls at Capcom. Honestly, I think this may be the one time where they've stretched it a bit farther, a bit too soon. Because much like everyone else, I had a few bugs myself. Mostly audio, oddly enough. The sound would just dip and cut out, and occasionally it would just be silent. It was just not fun. No visual issues though, and I was playing on performance the whole time on Series X, so I don't know. Visually, other than that, I think it's okay. I think it's best at sunset, which we don't see a lot. When it gets to nightfall, it's a shame because there is a lot of, even in this slightly more atmospheric and tonal rendition of the castle, the village. A lot of it is always darker coloured tones, and as a result, tailors the experience a bit to be a bit moody, which is a shame. I would like a bit more vibrance, is what I'm saying. And even though other than that, it all looks consistent. I feel like if you were to look at this and then look at the HD texture mods for RE4, this still beats it out because it's the RE engine. It can just do those kind of shiny effects better, which is not diminishing that mod at all. It's a fine piece of work. But yeah, it's amazing how well it holds up. Really, it does feel like it's falling apart with all the bugs that we're all experiencing, and I don't know how they managed to mess up the rain, which is a shame because there's a bit where like you're first going through the village with Ashley, and it's now windswept, and that kind of looks neat, but then the rain's just killing it. Shame.
Yes.
Musically, I think everyone's already hit pretty much everything else. That it's like, yeah, it's okay. It's nice they borrowed the quote-unquote leitmotif of the descent into the village for the Hot Chopper Assault. I pointed this out a while back with Si. I didn't realise James was going to bring it. I'm glad I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one who heard it. Yeah, the original classic soundtrack swap. It's a shame it's DLC. Should have been unlockable. It does work in the same way that RE2's classic soundtrack swap. It still fits remarkably well. And that's pretty much it. I think the standout for me, OST-wise, is probably going to be the main theme, the intro theme, reused in the shooting gallery.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And that's just more of a cute nod. Also, I don't know if we've said it enough, but the fact that the merchant jump scared me with his funny quotes, yeah, that's some great sound design, I guess. I don't know, casting. The way they use it to throw his voice like behind you, just like, oh, stranger! Like, yes, terrifying. More scary than any monster in the game, though.
Gun runs with fun!
Yeah, gun runs with fun for a reason, stranger!
I tell you what, there wasn't enough flamenco in this game.
Could have done with more
There should have been
flamenco.
more.
To be fair, actually, what I will say about the visuals, and you're right, Steve, like the windy effect is great. There are some really good sort of like particle effects and effects in general. The sort of main chamber as you come into the castle and you meet Salazar and fight off his first round of goons. There's this like fine mist across the floor there that's really, really cool that I love. So there's definitely some real big highlights in terms of the RE engine's history, certainly, that do definitely need a couple of shout-outs there. Jordan, I don't think you've said yet, so visual and audios?
Well, the one thing we knew from the get-go with the announcement of Remake 4 was that it was going to look great. We've sort of now seen sort of like quite an sort of extensive legacy now with the RE engine, that it is capable of putting out some fantastic visuals, both in first person and third person. So that was never a concern. That was never a sort of a worry, especially because it was very likely to be kind of in line with the visuals of Remake 2 and 3. But obviously it's in a completely different setting. And I think they did a fantastic job in sort of offering such a different sort of presentation when it came to all of those locations. Not only were they sort of like, redesigned in, cool ways to spin sort of iconic vistas, but also the original game could be monochromatic at times. And it's strange how many times you'll be, especially going through the village area, and it can look quite, beautiful. Like some of the color palettes for the scenes are excellent. I feel like they were able to inject a lot more color into this game without it being too much, without it sort of taking away from that original feel. But just enhance. I was especially sort of appreciative of the village area because it was incredibly brown and grey and yellow in the original for large swathes. And as effective as that can be, as stylistically dreary as it can be, I don't know, it's just, especially sort of like for how advanced the graphics are now, you want to kind of see a little bit more, something that pops out a little bit more. And so the village in particular has a whole lot more character to it because you constantly feel like it's ever changing, especially obviously with the change of the time of day. So yeah, it looks brilliant sort of throughout. All the praise really with regards to visuals is obviously in large credit to the RE engine, which I'm very curious to see exactly how much more mileage Capcom are going to get out of it before maybe they move to something else. I imagine it's probably got maybe about 2 more games in it. But yeah, it was excellent. I played this on PC. I have a 3070 card, so it was definitely going to be able to handle this. It did help to have the chainsaw demo beforehand, because I did have all of my crashes and glitches in that demo, and it was down to the settings that I chose. Now these are settings that I should have been able to choose, to be quite honest. Having RTX on shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it seemed to be the issue that kind of kept coming back up. If I put ray tracing on, it was sort of a countdown for whenever it was going to have a sort of an overload and a crash. I think that Capcom may well iron out some of those issues, but I know some of them are a bit more long-standing, like with terms of like image quality and such. It looked fantastic on my TV, which is 1080, so it's not like I was pushing this to the absolute max. But yeah, the presentation was pretty great. I would say that it does help to maybe mess around with the brightness and color settings, because depending on your TV and depending on your console, you can get a better image out of it, just at least in terms of sort of color authenticity and brightness, if you tweak it beyond sort of what the stock settings are. So that's important to do, because once I did that, it looked like a completely different game in some regards. Like, there were just areas where it was maybe a bit too dark, and upping the brightness only sort of washed it out. But there were a couple of other settings to tweak before that improved. But yeah, it just looks fantastic, and obviously cutscenes, well directed. You could put them together as a sort of a movie, and they'd be very entertaining. I think they'd kind of stack up quite well to the CGI movies. So I think everything's been sort of said on the visual side of things. Well, with regards to the UI, I'm not a fan. Like, there's not much to it, so it's not like it's the most offensive thing, but it's been the case for all of the remakes, is that they don't have any kind of personality to the overlay or any of the icons and stuff. It's very clinical and sort of minimalist, and I think that's perfectly fine if you just basically want something that is unintrusive. But I really liked some of the old Resident Evil menus and icons and health bars and stuff like that. And I think a lot of games are going the way of trying to sort of like minimize them as much as possible. But I would have liked the option.
Yeah, an option would be cool, certainly. I will say, though, that having the attaché case obviously would be... Not having that would be really weird, but that's a big improvement over the inventory systems of 2, 3, 7 and 8, which are just... Well, not 8, sorry. 2, 3 and 7, which are just black and white, boring nothing.
Well, that's the thing, is that I feel like Resident Evil 4 is a bit of a favourite for Capcom, and I think they maybe do give certain allowances to its legacy that they don't necessarily afford to some other games in the franchise, even though they are as iconic, if not more iconic. So, moving to the audio, I particularly feel bad for Resident Evil 2 fans when all their favourite tracks barely made it into the game at all when it got a remake. You basically needed to soundtrack swap to enjoy any of it, and there was barely any music at all in Remake 2, or at least not to the point of sort of prominence that you really got to experience it proper in the game. It's a bit more here in Remake 4. There is certainly a greater presence of music, just as there was sort of like a slightly more an increased presence in Remake 3. I think they're starting to get it into their heads that they can in fact play music during sequences of action and third-person Resident Evil. It is fine. It's allowed. And I am glad that so many themes have been incorporated in this game. It would have been, quite sort of dire if it would just went the way of Remake 2 and it was just very quiet most of the time. So I'm glad to see that, and I'm glad to see that they didn't try and emulate the original soundtrack, because I know it's very divisive, but I thought it was extremely distinct as a soundtrack. The original, very industrial, diegetic, feels like you're stuck in some kind of, gnashing sort of infernal machine. You're just surrounded, and everything's sort of closing in on you. I think it was the right choice to maybe actually go in a completely different direction, although it does impact certain areas and scenes. Regenerators and lab just feels so like pedestrian compared to what it was in the original, because the original had like I don't know how to describe the music from the lab in the original, but it was horrible, and it was part of the reason that enhanced the Regenerators so much. It was their entrance theme, and it was so looming, and it made everything feel wrong. I mean, a lot of the Resident Evil 4 songs kind of had that. I think I described in a previous podcast as sort of like a food poisoning sound to it. It just sounded wrong. You sounded infected. You sounded like it just. I don't know. There was something off about it, and as a bit of that sort of charm has been sort of lost in this game. That said, I do think that there are some strong themes. In particular, Ramon Salazar's boss theme is exquisite. I absolutely love that theme, and it just makes me think that when they maybe get to some other themes from other games like Code Veronica, they're going to dine out. I feel quite confident that they'll be able to kind of do justice to some of the other soundtracks throughout Resident Evil history. But that one in particular, I was like, this is fantastic. I was having so much fun during that boss fight, in particular because of the music. It's so dramatic, and it works so well for that boss. So it's obviously it is a bit of a mixed bag. It's not quite reaching out for its own identity, but it does have a few shades of it. And in general, I want to go back and actually listen to it proper. I'm just glad there's a bit more music in the games now. I'm glad they're not too afraid to actually play music while you play.
Yeah, I am looking forward to listening to it as well, because, as I've said previously, in Now That's What I Call Survival Horror, because I covered Remake 2, the soundtrack for the game's great. I just wish they used it more in the game. And I might have a similar effect listening to the music for Remake 4 in isolation. Who knows? So hopefully that changes over time. But that is going to bring us to conclusion time. It's time to wrap this baby up and send it home. What is everyone's final thoughts on Resident Evil 4 Remake? Where does it sit for you? I know that's a tough one, only having played it for a week. How does it compare to the original? So on and so forth. Basically, however you want to sum up your thoughts, I guess. Steve, let's start with you. Sort of the final word on Remake 4. The game, did it need a remake? Is it worth it? How do you feel about it now?
Did it need a remake for me personally? No, but I appreciate what it's done. As much as I feel like I've done nothing but complain on this podcast, or at least I feel like I have, I genuinely have enjoyed my time with it. I feel like people are already up in arms at the fact that Mercenaries doesn't ship with it, and that we haven't got any separate ways. But the main campaign in and of itself is well constructed, well developed, and it's fun to play. Which, in RE4's case, the gameplay is the part I feel like they had to nail more so than the story. And it hits mostly the right notes. There's a few caveats that annoy me personally, but you can work around them. And the new parry mechanic makes it more interesting. There's also side quests that, while a little half-baked, at least promise maybe a bit more in the future in terms of how they do an interconnected map and give players different things to do. But all in all, I feel like it's time we look away from remakes maybe and start doing some more original stuff. If you've never played Resident Evil 4 before, I believe it's a good jumping on point as any. Even if there are some narrative beats that don't follow quite the same way as the original, the general gist is still the same. Performances, overall, I had no real issue with, besides maybe a little bit of odd vocal direction. And yeah, all in all, a solid time. Out of all the recent remakes, though, RE2 is still the one for me. Obviously, the original Resident Evil 2, again, beats that. And it's very much the same with Resident Evil 4. So, yeah, bit good, but I still prefer the original.
Okay. James, what's your final thoughts on Remake 4?
I said in our wishlist episode, and leading up to some podcasts, that if this game got it right, it could be the best game in the franchise. And I think they did that, personally. It's laid groundwork for further gains with its parry system, a nice little passive system as well, which I want to see in both. I want to see in future games, even if they're done differently. And then there's the lore connections. Even if theory by me, it excites me, and it should excite other people too, because they're trying to make these remakes and bring them all together in a cohesive way, which is what Resident Evil has lost its way in the past kind of 15 years when it comes to that. Yeah, and Capcom are like I hope they finally bring that cohesion back to what basically the original 3 had. They had that lore cohesion there. RE4R is also a top contender for Game of the Year for me right now, and everyone should be playing this game.
Yeah, hard to disagree with that. Certainly, I obviously talked about my Resident Evil 4 history at length over the years and how it was never the game for me. It's not my not my Resident Evil 4. Because the remake is my Resident Evil 4. This is the Resident Evil 4 for me, based on that history. This is what I want the game to be, and also obviously just coming back in with less of that apprehension that will always be a little bit associated with the original. Just those memories that are associated with it. Get to have a bit of a clean slate with this one. I struggle with the recency bias thing, so I'm very thankful. I mean, I'm very thankful in general that I got to play this game a little bit early, but now my recency bias has really died down, so I can be quite confident in saying that this is very easily a top 5 Resident Evil game of all time for me, which is bizarre to say Resident Evil 4 is up there, but this one really is. I've had an incredible 60 plus hours with it, and more than that as well. Whilst I've complained about the number of playthroughs I'm going to have to do to finish it off, 6 months down the line or whatever, I can very easily see myself being like, do you know what? I'm going to play through it again. And also, like the original game, I'm going to do X, Y, Z this time. I'm going to only use these charms, this attaché case, these weapons, so on and so forth. Like, it really is conducive to just going back to every now and then. Obviously, this is all very much a personal take with my own convoluted history with Resident Evil 4. So it's going to colour that excessively. Even all that aside, totally agree. It's Game of the Year contender for sure, if not the Game of the Year. We'll have to see. It might well... It's really up there in terms of the best RE Engine games. Steve, I think I'm with you. I think 2 might be arguably the better game overall, like objectively. But, you know, I guess it depends on what you want anyway. Anyway, that was totally rambly and note-free, so I'm going to chuck it over to Jordan. What's your final thoughts on Remake 4?
Well, first of all, it is a fantastic package. Like, it's an exceptional experience, you know, when you actually look at it as its own thing. Actually sort of sitting down and sort of, you know, getting to the end of your first campaign, you really just want to jump right back in, because you know the game's got the kind of depth to offer that replayability. And I think it will be very much like the original Resident Evil 4, where, you know, that won't just be 6 months down the line, that'll be years down the line. You'll keep coming back, it'll become a yearly playthrough at the very least, trying different things, and just, it is a game that doesn't seem like it would be something that you could sort of tire of. Because I even though I obviously didn't feel like I was missing anything from the experience, I also felt like I had missed a lot of things that I can catch on the next experience. And I am certainly looking forward to, you know, sitting back down and starting it all over again, and, you know, going for those extra runs and, you know, unlocking the extra difficulties and that. It's a weird one because kind of coming into this was not a remake that I thought necessarily was necessary in the slightest, but also I didn't think that it was going to come this soon. We talked on the original podcast about, you know, where and when we expected the remake to happen, and I thought it would still be good for another probably 10 years without a remake. Of course, now we're in a different sphere. Ultimately, over the last maybe 5-6 years, the market of remakes is massive. It's completely changed. Utility is almost entirely out of the window, and also what you kind of like would have as sort of like the definitive idea of a remake has changed. It's broadened, it's branched out. You can have things which are just simply a visual overhaul, and they can be remakes, but you know, they still ultimately are authentic to the original. Then you have something which is more like a reimagining, which this kind of is, and because of that, it's hard to really kind of gauge what is the standard for a remake. I think if you're looking at this as a standalone experience, it's fantastic. As a remake, it kind of feels like there's been some opportunities missed, and it's weird because it's coming as the latest installment in. I don't know if it has a particular name for this particular era, this generation of Resident Evil from 7 onwards. But this particular generation has been like fantastic to watch. Watch it sort of like develop and grow out from the core titles and the remakes. You've often seen things, envelopes being pushed, or Capcom not being afraid to kind of branch out into different areas, even if they're going back to sort of beloved titles and remaking them and fundamentally changing aspects of them. And as such, Resident Evil 4 Remake feels like the safest project of this generation, because they pretty much just remade Resident Evil 4, and that shouldn't be ridiculous as a notion. It's just that I feel like they could have went in so many different ways with this. They could have tried sort of like reinventing it, and I do think that they maybe put on some kid gloves when it comes to Resident Evil 4, because they just don't want to upset the equilibrium. It remains obviously one of the sort of the most popular games in the franchise, not just with Resident Evil fans, but with fans of video games in general. And so I think that's why they didn't necessarily want to mess around. I don't want to chastise it too much for something that it's not trying to be, but at the same time, I feel like I can't overly praise it for how heavy it leans on the original, because a lot of the credit still goes to that original game from nearly 20 years ago. So in line with the other remakes as well, it feels a bit like Resident Evil 4, which was often sort of like a real standout sort of special edition that just kind of it showed up and changed the game entirely. Kind of feels like it's a bit streamlined here, and obviously that's partly been paved because of Remake 2 and Remake 3 so heavily leaning on Resident Evil 4 in the first place. So when it gets to 4, it feels a little bit more standard. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, really, and where necessarily that sort of like leads the series with regards to its remakes, which I am certain are continuous and inevitable. I'm sure that this has been a success model that will, see Capcom through for at least the next 5 or 6 years. For newcomers, I feel like this will be the definitive Resident Evil 4. Which is a massive success for this game, that it can manage to make a game that I feel is, essential and can easily be playable now, actually be not necessarily the default choice that I would recommend to people. And so for that, I would say it's great for newcomers. I'd even recommend it over the original, which I feel blasphemous even saying. If the original to me is a 9.5 or even higher, I've said before that it's near close to perfect, save for a few things. If I say that's a 9.5, I don't think I can give this game any higher than an 8. And I know that's really harsh, but I think it's just because I think it could have done with expanding a bit more and making more of its own identity. As much as it has played like a great role in sort of recreating so many of those, moments from the original game and how iconic they were, I feel like it always could have done more. And I know that's being super harsh on it, because it is a great game that I've sunk 20 hours into easy, and will sink another 100 hours into easy. So I have to kind of come up with the balance, and for me, ultimately, it's not the game that I wanted, but what it is pretty great anyway. And yeah, that's my piece on it. That's the piece that I can make with this game.
For what it's worth as well, to be fair, in terms of the review scores for these games, they were ridiculous. So many publications went straight for the 10 out of 10. Fair enough. But for me, even saying that this is my Resident Evil 4, this is easily a top 5 game, yeah, it's got issues. It's an 8 out of 10 for me as well. So I don't think it's anywhere near perfect by any means, but yeah, it's still incredible. Kelsey, final thoughts on Remake 4?
Very well said, Jordan. Very well said, everybody. I think I share a lot of the sentiments everybody said. This, I've really enjoyed the buzz around this game. Like before release, it's felt like the biggest thing for RE in years, and just with the way the fandom has been hyped for it and stuff like that. And I think the game itself has mostly delivered on the promise that it set out for. Yeah, it's no secret I've been on a journey with RE4 in general. I had a lot of fun when it came out originally, but at no point was it the Resident Evil that I was personally looking for. I felt it was missing the grounded nature and, survival horror of the originals that I fell in love with. And then over time, I just grew even more distant from it. I think the controls aged very quickly, and kind of anything other than the Wii version was never really fun for me to play. I've never played it in VR, just a disclaimer there, which I hear is very good. Tank controls with over-the-shoulder camera in a game with mobs of enemies coming at you, I don't think it was ever a perfect combination, and it was kind of new and fresh at the time, but then advanced upon and refined very quickly by other games. And now here we are. This remake to me feels like the game that the original RE4 wanted to be, in almost every single way. The original pioneered aspects of gaming that we take for granted today, and I just don't feel like some aspects of it stood the test of time, whereas the first few RE games have, for reasons I touched upon earlier about the controls. And I think adding this modern polish to RE4 with a remake just proves how much of an awesome game the original is at its core, because so much of it is intact here, and it's just, for me, better to play and interact with the remake. Plus they upped the atmosphere. The fact that some of the original has aged for me takes nothing away from what it delivered at the time, but I just think the truth is, for me, this remake is more enjoyable to play than the original. The more fluid gameplay, better character interactions, more interesting character backstories, a slightly better connection to the wider scope of Resident Evil in general. It looks great, it sounds incredible. And yeah, as a remake, it just ticks so many boxes, and I was blown away many times while playing it. And, I have criticisms, I think, similar to everybody, and I've mentioned them earlier. It's still, for me, it's still lacking in the really big scares that I want from Resident Evil and that I know Capcom can do, because we've seen them do it recently. I'm not a fan, really, of the island, the handling of Sadler, the few bugs and glitches. Much like Leon's relationship with Ada, Capcom have burned me a few times in the last year or so. We've been spoilt for content, and not all of it has been great. When it comes to games, Shadows of Rose was not a direction I enjoyed. RE-verse was an embarrassment for the franchise. And RE4 Remake, for me, has just put Resident Evil back on the map in such a big way. I hope everyone likes remakes, because this has sold a lot of copies, and there is no way this is the last one. I can't wait to see more. I'm excited for Mercenaries and any DLC we get. Yeah, despite the issues I have, what an achievement this game is. Sai, I share a lot of your sentiments. I'm struggling really to put many games above this in a tier list, and I think when it's all said and done, this is comfortably top 5 Resident Evil for me. Well done, Capcom. I don't think, when they announced it, I honestly don't think anyone thought they were going to pull it off, and I think they have. I think they've smashed it. So yeah, well done.
Yeah. Even if you had high expectations, I think, even if you had high expectations, like the critical, commercial, everything has been super, super high, and we touched on it a little bit, that the stuff people are finding in this game is really great. It's so cool to see everyone finding all these little tricks and stuff. Everyone's talking about it, and you're absolutely right. This is not the end of the remake train. It's going to keep chugging along, but this one gave us Luis Serra Navarro. So, nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors, our Patreons, and our listeners. Join the First Aid Spray Discord server to become part of our community and hear the show early and unedited. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. All of these links and all of our content can be found at faspraypod.com. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcasting apps. And if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review where you can and spread the good word. Don't forget you can support the show by picking up some merchandise or at patreon.com/FA Spray Pod for as little as $1 a month. In our next episode, we'll be launching in Valdalobos and Castle Salazar as we wait out the arrival of the free Mercenaries update to Resident Evil 4 Remake, so look forward to that. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all of the Pueblo people individually. I'm at Cyniac_123. Steve is at FB Steve Was Taken. Jordan is at Cerealbox64. James is at Moist Owlets OFF. And Kelsey is at K_D_B_. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week. I'm ready to talk about this game. I don't know if I'm physically ready to sit here for 3.5 hours, but
I guess if someone like needs a wee break, speak up and say we can pause for like 2 minutes. Yeah. Or I might just quietly go while Si's talking.
Yammering on.
No, I would go when I'm talking about the story.
Are you talking about like an actual break to go to the bathroom, or just like a wee break, like
a wee break,
just a small break, Yeah.
Break time's over, I suppose.
Rhymes with fun. Jump scared me. God knows how many times with that.
There was such a good timing moment in the game when I was playing it. It's just after you get Ashley and you're kind of coming back through and you go past the merchant and she says, "Oh, Leon, can we, take a break for a second?" It's like, "Oh, no, sorry." And then you just hear the merchant, like, literally a second later, "Oh, break time's over, I suppose."